Okay, awesome. So let's go ahead and let's get started. So, as you already recall from our last video, we are building a to-do list using the MERN stack. And we're going through this series of MERN stack mastery. And where we kind of left off already is we had a fully functioning to-do list application. It was working, but the only problem that we have is we want to use this component-driven development concept that we previously spoke about with separation of concerns. We talked about before how separation of concerns traditionally in front-end development is things being broken down into HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. But in React, when we kind of get into this component-driven development mind state, we start to instead care more about separating things not by just what they do, JavaScript, CSS, HTML, but instead separating them into, for example, as you can see, separating into a button. And all of the functionality that has to go with that button, the structure of the button, the styling of the button, the functionality of the button, all going together um, inside of one specific location. So what we're doing is we're breaking our application down instead of it being broken down into like these hierarchies of structure, presentation, and functionality. We're breaking things down instead into the actual UI component itself. So everything that has to do with the button will be with the button files. Everything that has to do with the date picker will be the date picker. Everything needs to do with the modal, the list item, the media, etc. We'll separate that. We'll separate those and treat them as concerns. This is my concern for this button. This is everything concerning this button. This is everything concerning this date picker, etc. In our application, what we want to do is we want to apply this concept to building our to-do list, and we already made two components: to-do list and to-dos, and we want to break that down um, and essentially take the working functionality that we have now in app.js and put it into those two different components. So that's what we essentially want to do. So we've already worked through learning about the use state hook and how we can utilize that. So we're going to be using that again today. And we're also going to see that we can take those pieces of state that we might make in a parent component and pass that down as props to a child component. And so we'll see that all in action as we build our app today. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up the application where we previously started, and I want to identify um, the the pieces that work already in our current application, and I want to move those into our components. So I want us to see how we actually take these working pieces of functionality that we have and how we get them to work inside of our to-do list. And so essentially what it is that we are trying to accomplish here is we want to make it so that the app.js will no longer have any of this code here anymore. All this code will exist inside a to-do list in to-do.js. And the hierarchy that we're going to create is the app.js essentially is going to be our how can I say, our app.js is going to be our parent, and to-do list is going to be a child of app.js, and to-do.js will be a child of that. So in order for us to get started with that process, let's go to list.js and let's at least get something on the page. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to write export default. I'm going to just go ahead and create this component. So I'm going to say export default function. I'm going to call it to-do list, right? So to-do list. I'm going to say that it accepts props. Go ahead and drop a set of curly braces there. I'm going to say that it returns some JSX. And my JSX is going to look like this. And then within it, I'm going to just put a little h1 in here for right now. And I'm going to say to-do list component. Then I'm going to go into to-do.js. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to say export default, right? function. I'm going to say to do, say that it accepts some props, throw some curly braces in there. I'm going to have it return some code. And I'm going to drop a little h1 in there, and I'm just going to say to do component. Now, essentially what we want to do is we want to make it so that inside the app.js, we're going to render the to-do list. And inside the to-do list, we're going to render the to-do.js. Inside to-do.js, we're going to have individual to-dos here that we will be able to see on our screen. To kind of remind us how this functionality works, we're going to go over to the package.json. And remember, in order for us to run our application, we need to run both the server and the client. So I'm going to start up my terminal. I'm going to split it in two. And I'm going to always run the server first. So I'm going to say npm run server. Right? And that starts up. And then I'm going to say npm run. And then I'm going to go ahead and run the client over here. And then I'm going to start my React Developer Tools. And you can see I just have my app here, all the app's data. I can see that I can create a to-do. If I go ahead and say hello, the to-do gets created here at the top. I can complete the to-dos, right? And I can delete the to-dos also, right? So my general functionality here is working. I can create, read, update, and destroy the data. Creating it, for example, here, create a to-do, right? I can read the to-dos. I can see them. Right? I can update it to do. I can take it from being complete to being from being not complete to being completed. That's updating it. So create, read, update, and now I delete it, and now it's gone. So I can create, read, update, and destroy the to-dos. Right? So my functionality is working the way that I expect it to work. Now, essentially what I want to do in my application, like we mentioned, is I want to take this functionality that we have here that we've already proven works, and we want to move that functionality into our components. So what we can do in order to figure that out is first we need to brainstorm a little bit. We need to figure out, okay, how am I going to do that? So if I take a look at the component here, this app.js, you can see I have a bunch of functions here, some state variables. I've got some working functionality down here at the bottom. And if I take a look at this first piece here at the top, I see this is the input field that allows me to create new to-dos. Now, if I want to take this piece of functionality and put it into a component, there's a couple different things I can do. And every single one of them is valid, and you can feel free to move forward whichever way you feel like. But I'm going to, of course, have to choose one way, and that's the way that I'm going to do it in this particular example. So one thing that we can do is we could take this input field, and we could make a component for it, and it could be its own component. That's one option that we have, right? Another option is we can take this this part that creates to-dos, and we could just make it part of the to-do list component, right? That's another thing that we can do. Another option is we could take this piece and decide, you know what, I don't want to put it in its own component. I'm going to leave this and just leave it inside the app.js. Now, each of those options is all valid. I'm going to elect to do it the what I believe the simplest way is, which is just to take it and put it in the to-do list. But I could make this its own component, and I could just make another component called create to do or whatever I want to call it. I could also, of course, leave it in the app.js, which I'm going to choose not to do because I think it's going to look a little bit messy that way. So I'm not going to do it that way either. But those are my choices. I can do any of those. I can do any of those three. And there's probably some other things I could do as well if I think hard enough. My point is that just because you would elect to do something differently than I would doesn't mean that you are doing it incorrectly. as long as you don't break any of the React rules and your application works and it does not break, and like I said, you're not breaking any of the React cardinal rules that you might have heard previously. And if you haven't heard, I am definitely going to do a video on it, on all of them. So you can take a look at that video once that video comes out. But at the end of the day, as long as you have valid code, the way that you solve the problem is fine, right? So keep that in mind. But like I said, I'm going to choose to take this create to do piece and I'm going to put it inside the to-do list component. So in order for me to do that, whenever you are going to take a large piece of code and you're going to break it down into something smaller, what you need to do is you need to identify what you need, what you need to put into that smaller piece of code. So what I'm going to identify is all the data that I need to give to ToDoList in order for ToDoList to be able to actually use this code. So for me to get started, what I'm going to do is I'm first going to need to import ToDoList here at the top. So I'm going to come up here at the top and I'm going to import the ToDoList. Right? After I import the ToDoList, I'm going to add the ToDoList here at the very top of the app.js like this. Right? I'm just going to go ahead and do that. And what I'm going to have to start doing is giving it the data it needs in order to move this piece of code into ToDoList. So what I'll do is I'm going to look one by one at each line and see if it's using any data from app.js. So when I get to the first line, I see that value is equal to new to do.title, right? I also see set new to do here. I see new to do here, and I see create to do here. So when I look through that, I already see a bunch of pieces of data that I'm going to need. I'm going to need the new to do. And I'm going to go ahead and add new to do because I need that in order for me to be able to take this piece of code and put it into ToDoList. I need whatever data it needs in order to work, so I need new to do. I'm also going to need set new to do, right? As you can see, I'm using that as well. So I'm going to need set new to do. You also see that I need create to do. And now that I have those pieces of data, right, that I'm passing down to the to-do list, I will now be able to copy over this code. But before I do that, I want to show you something really quickly. And that is if I come here, right, right now I don't see the to-do list popping up here at all because I have yet to render it, right, in the app. So once I actually save this, right, and I go back, I should now see that the to-do list is now being rendered inside the app.js. And if I look at the props for the to-do list, now the create to do, new to do, and set new to do are all passed down as data from the app.js to the to-do list. So now the to-do list itself has access to that data inside of its props, for me to go ahead and use. So if I come back over to my code and I go to ToDoList.js, first I'm going to copy over all of that code. I'm going to come to ToDoList.js. I'm going to get rid of the H1, and I can drop that add to do code in there. I'm going to go ahead and format it correctly. So I'm reading the format a little odd, so I'm going to go ahead and fix that. And instead of just having the word add to do here, I'm going to say add new to do here, just to differentiate between this one and the one that's going to be in from app.js. So if you look down, you see to-do list component doesn't say anything. I see add to do here. That's the one from the app.js, right? And if I go ahead and save that file now, right? We have a little typo, right? No, we don't have a typo yet. But like I said, now I've added that code over and I've saved it. And now you'll notice that, for example, here I see new to do, set new to do, create to do. But technically, I'd have to say props.new to do, or props.set new to do, right? Or props.create to do. In order for me not to have to type props, put props in each one of those locations, I'm going to use object destructuring, right? And I'm just going to go ahead and drop in new to do here, create to do, and then I'm also going to add set new to do, right? And essentially what that's going to do for me is I'm destructuring out of the props object. As you can see, create to do, new to do, and set new to do are all here, right inside the props object. I'm going to destructure them out, right? And I'm going to come back here over to my my code, and you can see new to do, create to do, and set new to do have all been destructured out. If I save it, right? Now I can call each one of those by name, and I don't have to say props.new to do or props.set to do. And now you'll see up here at the very, very top, you'll see this says add new to do up here at the top, and then right next to it you see add to do, right, is there as well. And if I go ahead and start typing and add new to do, you'll see that it also starts to change here on the right side inside of add to do. And the reason why I'm seeing that is because they're both actually referencing the exact same data. So since they're both bound to that data, if I go ahead and start to change one, the other one is going to change as well. And I'm showing you this just to prove to you that we have 100% copied over the functionality from app into ToDoList. It's the exact same functionality accessing the exact same data. And that's critical for you to see, that it's accessing the exact same functionality and exact same data, right? So if I come back over to my code now, and I go back to app.js, now that I've effectively copied that, I can now remove this here, and I can save it. I'll go back over to the browser, and I will go ahead and make a to-do. That to-do was made, and I can complete the to-do, delete the to-do. The functionality is still working the exact same way, with that form, with that little input now being inside ToDoList instead of being inside app directly. So now we have that working. Now what I want to do is I want to take this functionality here. I want to take this, and I want to put this inside of ToDoList as well. And on top of that, I want to take these divs, and this is what I want to be inside ToDo.js. So how do we handle that? Well, that's going to be a little bit more interesting. Essentially, what I'm going to still have to do is I'm going to have to make sure ToDoList has access to all the data that these blocks of code are using. So that's going to be step one. So first, I'm going to notice that the to-dos that this to-dos right here is using to-dos here and move to completed. So to-dos and move to completed have to be added as props to ToDoList. So I say to-dos and move to completed. Both of them need to be passed down as props so that they can be used in the child component. And if I look down again, I see completed to-dos and delete to-do need to be passed down as well. Right? So we go ahead and we say completed to-dos is equal to completed to-dos, and delete to-do is equal to delete to-do. Reminder, the reason why I'm not looking at to-do.title, why I'm not looking at this is to remember, remember how this ends up working. We have completed to-dos, .map, and remember .map then has a callback function. And so this to-do here stands for each to-do in the completed to-dos array. So this isn't new data, right? So this is something I need to pass down the to-do list, right? The things I'm looking for are essentially the pieces of data that come from the app component, right, that need to get passed down to to-do list as a prop. So that's what I'm identifying. So now that's done. Now that's all passed down. And if I go back to my browser and take a look, right, I should now see that to-do list now has new to-do, set new to-do, to-dos, move to completed, etc. All that additional data is now inside the props, right? And it's listed here in alphabetical order. So completed to-dos at the top and to-dos at the bottom. Right? So now that has been sufficiently done. And what the next thing I want to notice is what's here inside this data. And you're going to see that we actually have two problems. And those two problems are simply that both these divs are structured the same way, but you can see that they use different functions here for their on clicks, here and here. And they also use different text here for the buttons, which is going to be perfectly fine for us. But we do need to identify that. And so when you are, doing the templating that we're doing right now, what we need to try to identify is what things are the same in different things where we want to use the same component and what things are different. And the things that are the same is they both are divs. They both contain one button inside of it. They both have one function for the on-click, right? Their on-clicks both taking the same parameter, right? And and the buttons each have one word for the text. So there's a lot of things that are the same. So what we could do is when we come over to to-do.js, I'm going to go ahead and copy this and go over to, like I said, to-do.js. And I'm going to replace that h1 with that div. And I also no longer need the fragments, so I'll remove the fragments. And we're going to have to do a little bit of creativity here. So what I'm going to say here is that our component is going to need to get a to-do passed down to it. We can see that. It's also going to, you see how we have moved to completed, but that's going to change from component to component. So instead, I'm just going to say event. What's that called? Event. Let's call it let's call it button action. It's going to need a button action. Right? And then here, where we have word complete, I'm going to substitute that for button text. Right? So now we have to do button action and we have button text. Another thing that I'm going to point out is you see this keys equal to do.id. I'm going to remove that because we don't need to pass that in that way. And you'll see why in a second. But we don't need to do that. And now we have a little template here that we have for our to-dos. The title will go here. The button action will go here. The ID of the to-do will get passed into the button action, right? And the button text will go here. And that's what the to-do needs. It needs its to-do, an action for the button, and some text for the button, right? And now we can take that to-do, save, and we can go to to-do list, and we can import it into here. So I'm going to import that to-do in to-do list so we can use it within that to-do list. So import to-do from /to-do. Right? And then what I'm also going to do is, remember that we added these extra functions here, to-dos, move to completed and delete to-do, as well as these extra state variables of to-dos and completed to-dos, right? So I'm going to come back over to to-do list, and I'm going to add those. And since this is getting kind of long, I'm going to put this on multiple lines. And we'll say to-dos, completed to-dos, and move to completed. And also, after move to completed, we also need the delete to do. Right? And then what we're going to do is we're going to come back over here to app.js. And you see we have our two lists. I'm going to copy that code from those two lists. I'm going to put it over here in our to-do list. I'm going to drop it here. And I'm going to save it. Right? And now we should see two copies of it. So when we go back here, we can see that I have two sets of lists, right? I've got the one from my app.js and the one from my to-do list. If I add a new to-do, let's say hello, you see that both to-do lists are updating. And if I go ahead and hit complete, it both gets moved to both of the completed lists, right? So the functionality is working identically. So that means that I no longer need the one in app.js because the one in to-do list is working correctly. So I will remove this code now. And see, now it looks so much cleaner because now only to-do list is being rendered in app.js, right? Right, and I'm just cleaning this up. Right, just lining up the things that should be lined up. Right, so now we have our to-do list here being rendered. And then we have inside the to-do list, right, we have these lists of divs. But these divs should be able to be replaced with us rendering to-dos instead. So this is where we're going to go ahead and make that happen. So I'm going to remove that, and I'm going to remove that, and I'm going to replace it with the to-dos that we just made. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and clean this up. Make sure that parenthesis is there where it belongs. Right? And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to just render a to-do. I'm going to give it a key that is equal to the to-do dot underscore ID. I'm going to say the to-do is going to be equal to to-do. And remember, what we have in to-do.js, we also need the button action and button text, right? So, because we need that button action and button text, let's go ahead and add that as well. And I'm just formatting this so that it will run correctly. So we have our to-do, we have our button action, and the button action on the to-do is going to be move to completed. And then the button text is going to be equal to, let's say, what do we want it to say? We want to say complete, right? And then we can mimic that exact same functionality here. And I'm going to go ahead and add a to-do. Yep, that's right. And good. So then we'll go ahead and we'll say we have a key. And the key is going to be the to-do's ID. Remember, the key has to be a unique identifier. The to-do, right, is going to be the to-do. The button action for this one is going to be the delete. And the button text for this one is going to also be delete. Right? And then we'll go ahead and save that and look at what we have. And it should be rendering the exact same way. And you can see now that what we see inside of our hierarchy here is we see an app, we see a to-do list, and we see a to-do component for each one of our to-dos. So if I was to, for example, complete one of them, it should move down just like it did just now. If I go ahead and create one, it should make a brand new to-do component will get created and get added to this list. And also you see that each one of them has the key, and that key is just coming from the ID that the item has inside of our database. And voila, now we have our full CRUD capability, but we also have done that component-driven development. So we have broken everything down into its own component, and now we have a nice, beautiful component architecture that we can see how we were able to use our component-driven development to essentially to separate concerns. And the ones I want you to particularly look at is you see this one that says list and list item. So we have a list of the to-do list, and each to-do you could look at as an item, as a list item specifically. And we have now that now we've compartmentalized the to-do list to have the concern of just rendering a list of to-dos. And now you have inside the to-do itself of what should be inside of that to-do item, right? And that's what we have inside of our code now. So we have our app rendering our to-do list, right? We have our to-do list that renders that we can use to create a new to-do and render a list of to-dos and completed to-dos. And then we have our to-do component that essentially will make each to-do conform to the same look and feel. And all it needs to have its data, which is the to-do. It needs to have the action that you want the button to perform and the text that you want the button to show. So now we have this reusable component that we could use anywhere. And our application is working just as smoothly as it was before, just better organized. And it would make it easier for a team or something like that to work on this, because you could have one person working on the to-do, one person working on the to-do list, and one person working on the functionality inside the app.js. Right? So that wraps up what we need to do here. Next thing that we're going to do is we are going to now talk about, now that we've broken things down into its own component, how can we then style this in our application. So that's it for this part of our series, and I will see you in the next video.